As if unsuggested.
I thank the honourable member for bringing forward this really important debate, and I know how much he enjoys a dip in the River Tone on occasions. But the River Parrett in Langport is a well-known and loved body of water for swimming and water sports, which I hope will soon become a designated bathing water site. But sadly, polluters have discharged sewage in it 54 times in 2023, amounting to 453 hours of pollution. So does my honourable friend agree with me that it's crucial that we support sites like this to obtain bathing water status so that they are safe for all who wish to use them?
My honourable friend and neighbour, of course, is absolutely right that we need to see more bathing waters, not fewer, and that's one of the concerns I have in this debate. And bathing waters are not just places where people swim, they're part of the identity and lifeblood of our communities across the country. As in my own constituency, they're places where people come together, swimming clubs, rowing clubs, kayaking, paddleboarding, or just to enjoy the natural beauty of the river itself. I will give way.
Can I commend him and he's invited a contribution from those of us who are interested in bathing waters. And my constituent of Strangford, of course, Strangford Lough, number 1, REC on the other side. The DERA back home is the department that designates water quality. One of the concerns that I have, and just ask the other gentlemen, is a similar concern, is the issue, if you want to check the water quality of where you want to go to in either the Irish Peninsula, Strangford Lough or the REC, you go online. That doesn't suit everybody. And would the honourable gentleman agree with me, perhaps what I have indicated to DERA they should do is put up on the shores where the people go for their designated water places a sign that says the water quality is. In a much simpler situation, the people who go there for the wild water swimming as they do and others would then be able to see right away if the water quality is to the level that it should be.
Thank you, Sir John. And yes, seeing the quality of the river water is of key importance, and that's one of the things bathing water status allows us to have. But in tackling that sort of improvement, many local groups face an uphill battle. Sewage pollution is a national disgrace. Time and again we see reports of raw sewage being discharged into our rivers, lakes and seas, turning what should be places of recreation into sites of contamination. Further downstream on the Tone, there is an example in my constituency with recent discharges of untreated effluent commonplace. At Hook Stream, what could otherwise be a charming stretch of the River Tone, there have been over 188 hours of discharge in the first 8 weeks of 2025 alone. Residents are appalled, rightly, by the sewage releases. No one should have to fear that going too close to their local river can make them ill, especially as all the while water companies have paid out millions in dividends and bonuses. We need flow rate monitoring, extra stormwater storage and resources for the Environment Agency to increase enforcement. But bathing water regulations are, of course, a key tool in reducing pollution. That brings me to the main topic of this debate. There are elements here that I welcome in the consultation. Removing the automatic 5-year designation rule for bathing waters is a positive suggestion. It would simply be unfair that communities lose their protections that come with designation just because a site has remained polluted for 5 years. The reality is that people will continue to swim in those waters, as they have done in French River hundreds and hundreds of years, regardless of whether they're officially designated or not. In fact, having a high number of bathers is, of course, what allows sites to be designated, and that should continue to be the main criterion. Removing monitoring, which is what would happen with de-designation, would just put rivers and their users at further risk. It wouldn't stop people using the rivers. Water companies and regulators frequently take longer than 5 years to clean up a site in any event, and people should not be punished by losing their designation because that hasn't happened fast enough. Let's not forget that improving water quality in bathing areas has wider benefits throughout the whole of the river's catchment area. Improving infrastructure in bathing areas that are susceptible to flooding therefore benefits communities along the whole length of the watercourse. Part of the problem is misalignment between the 4-year rolling cycle of bathing designation and Ofwat's 5-year price review for water companies, which sets out their investment plans for the period. A newly designated bathing water often has to wait years for the price review to see the investment required. Designation in bathing water should come aligned with those improvements in investment. So can I ask the Minister, amongst other things, if she has taken any steps to resolve that discrepancy? The health and well-being of those who use the waters should also be a primary concern of regulation, which is why I'm concerned about Core Reform 2 in the consultation, a proposal to introduce feasibility tests for bathing sites. This would mean that if it's deemed too difficult or too expensive to improve water quality, a site could be denied designation altogether. Who would really benefit from that approach? Certainly not the swimmers, rowers, kayakers, residents. It would only be the ones to stand to gain would be the very polluters responsible for the problem in the first place. We must not give water companies a loophole to argue that it's too costly to clean up a bathing site where people are using it regularly for swimming and other recreation. Designation would be based on where people actually use the water. So I asked the Minister, will she please reconsider that aspect of what is perhaps well-intentioned but ultimately damaging proposal? Core Reform 3 of the consultation proposes to remove fixed bathing season dates and move them into guidance. Now, of course, welcome greater flexibility, but the now well-accepted 15th of May to 30th of September bathing season should remain the irreducible minimum that everybody understands and knows about. This should not be a cover for reducing bathing seasons to such a short window that they become meaningless. We should be going further. We should be having year-round testing, which should be standard, in my opinion. We also need better quality testing, and for better integration with other monitoring systems. We should be monitoring sewage volume from spills, not just ours, as I've said. We should also consider testing for a wider range of bacteria than just E. coli and enterococci, especially considering other harmful pathogens like salmonella and leptospirosis have since 2010 contributed to a 60% rise in hospital admissions for waterborne diseases. There should be greater funding for the EA to monitor runoff into rivers as well. Only by understanding the scale of the problem are we going to be able to start to tackle it. This will not be prohibitively expensive. Research from Surfers Against Sewage, who I'd like to thank publicly for all their great work on this issue, suggests the additional cost of year-round monitoring per site would be roughly £775. Across the UK, that amounts to £350,000. That's less than 4% of the bonuses paid to water company execs last year. Surely an investment worth making. Will the Minister publish a review into the potential cost of year-round water testing? And the reality is that our inland bathing waters are already in a dire state. While 92% of the 450 bathing waters in England meet minimum standards, that drops to only 53% in the inland bathing waters. In contrast, Germany has over 2,200, almost 2,300 bathing sites. The vast majority of them are inland. The fact that 98% of them meet minimum standards shows us what is possible. Instead of looking for ways to limit new designations, we should be expanding them so that more communities benefit from cleaner, safer waters. Had a feasibility requirement existed previously, there would we'd never have seen so many bathing waters granted in the first place. Perhaps there would be no more inland water bathing designations in the country. We also need urgent action to hold polluters accountable. Water companies operate on a 5-year investment cycles, meaning that improvements to polluted waters often get kicked down the road for years. We cannot afford to wait. We need a tougher regulator than Ofwat, one with proper powers to hold these companies to account. We also need more immediate funding to improve water quality at newly designated sites, rather than forcing them to wait for the next investment cycle, as I've said. Ultimately, this debate is about a simple principle. Everyone should have the right to access sites with unpolluted water, and the government must not allow water companies to dictate which sites are worthy of protection and which are not. Let's take this opportunity to strengthen, not weaken, our protections for bathing waters. It's time to expand, not limit, the sites that benefit from designation. Above all, it's time to ensure that polluters are held accountable so that future generations can enjoy bathing waters like French Weir, our rivers, our lakes and seas without fear of pollution. Thank you, Sir John.
Very good. Order. Now, if members want to contribute, they should bob. I want to call the front benchers at about 5:10, so you can work out how long you need to speak so that everyone could get in. Very good. Now, who's going to go next? Let's do some bobbing and I can call someone. Excellent. Right, well, let's have a look at Pippa Halings.
Thank you, Chair, and it is an honour to serve under your chairship, and I really very much want to thank our honourable friend, Member for Taunton and Wellington, for bringing this critical, important debate. While there were many undoubtable challenges brought on by COVID-19, one positive outcome was the surge in open water swimming. More people than ever before are enjoying blue spaces for recreational activities, reaping significant benefits to both their physical and mental well-being. However, many were more cautious about diving into freezing cold lakes and rivers and streams when they were aware of the levels of bacteria and pollution present in our waters. And as Liberal Democrats, we've long passionately campaigned on this issue. Last year, the Lib Dems discovered that water companies had discharged sewage over 100,000 times in areas designated as current bathing waters, putting both public health and local ecosystems at risk.
Would my honourable friend wait, please?
I will.
My constituency, Tiverton and Minehead, neighbours my honourable friend's patch in Taunton and Wellington. And very recently, one of my constituents shared a harrowing story with me in which his children fell seriously ill after swimming in a local river last summer. And these public health risks are further exacerbated by bad flooding in our areas, as we have seen in recent episodes, which sweeps contaminants and overwhelms sewage systems into our waterways, which degrades water quality. So would my honourable friend agree with me that stricter regulations must be introduced in the interests of public health and to ensure that our bathing waters are safe for everybody to enjoy?
I thank my little friend. I completely agree with her, and also I would like to emphasise what my honourable friend said in introducing this debate, which is that is why we need tougher action on the water companies. We also need to take actions on the combined sewers, and also in terms of the improvements in small sewage treatment works on many chalk streams, like in my constituency. However, the debate here is about the bathing site designation, and that is one of the effective measures and levers that can be used. And we are talking today to the proposed reforms by DEFRA to bathing site designations. And I'd like to talk to the second core reform being proposed, and that I'm concerned would lead to real reduction in the number of bathing sites being designated, rather than us having more bathing sites that should be designated, particularly on inland waters. This second core reform says that it should include the feasibility of improving a site's water quality to at least sufficient as a criterion for final designation. This would avoid poor value for money by limiting expenditure where water quality improvement is not feasible or proportionate. To best demonstrate why this reform would not only fail but could also damage water quality in our rivers, it's worth sharing the story of Sheep's Green in my constituency. For centuries, people have been enjoying Sheep's Green, a popular spot on the River Cam. But it was Sheep's Green where we worked to bring in a bathing site designation because of the poor level of the water, the quality. And in October 2023, the Cam Valley Forum, a local voluntary organisation, submitted an application to DEFRA to grant Sheep's Green designated bathing water status. This came after 3 years of hard work by local volunteers, which is truly commendable. The first section of the river in the country, they're based on the success of the River Wharfe. The idea of getting Sheep's Green, used for decades without official recognition, designated bathing status, had widespread public support. Over the course of a 10-week consultation, the Cam Valley Forum received more than 500 responses, with an overwhelming 93% in favour of the designation. South Cambridgeshire District Council and Cambridge City Council also formally backed the proposal. Anglian Water, with whom I worked on this, also fully supported the designation application. And once designated, as predicted by local volunteers and citizen scientists, Sheep's Green was classified as having poor water quality. This triggered a statutory obligation for improvements to clean up the source of the pollution, the Haslingfield sewage works in my constituency. For years, local citizen scientists had suspected this was the culprit. Now, finally, Anglian Water was legally required to act. Bathing water status also unlocked funding from Ofwat under the Water Industry National Environment Programme. Tens of millions of pounds, vital for the infrastructure improvements needed to reduce the sewage discharges, were made available for Haslingfield, with work expected to begin in the next 2 years. These improvements won't just benefit swimmers at Sheep's Green, but will have a wider impact on the ecological health of the River Cam. However, Had this core reform too been in place when the Cam Valley Forum began its journey in 2020, there would have been no bathing water designation for Sheep's Green. Without that designation, there would have been no investigation by the Environment Agency, no identification of Haslingfield sewage works as the source of the pollution, no legal requirement for Anglian Water to take action. The WINEP funding would not have been available, and we would have lost the opportunity for water improvements and nature restoration in South Cambridgeshire. In short, Core Reform 2 would have inadvertently blocked the clean-up of hundreds of rivers if it was to take place. Local organisations like the Cam Valley Forum are not just highlighting a problem with their concerns around the Reform 2, they are demanding action. And they're rightly pushing for bathing water status because it's a vital tool for driving cleaner, healthier rivers. And we should be supporting these efforts, not hindering them. Thank you.
Freddie Van Mierlo.
Thank you, Sir John. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I'd like to thank my honourable friend for securing this important debate. As a former Cabinet Member for Climate Change and Nature Recovery on South Oxfordshire District Council, I've been involved in 2 bathing water status applications, one successful, one not. You often learn more from failure than success, so while I'm delighted by the bathing water status achieved at Wallingford Beach, I will speak mostly to the desire to establish bathing water status in Henley. What I learned is that the current system is perverse. It requires swimmers to brave potentially dirty water before a site is cleaned up. This is topsy-turvy thinking, and it's all wrong. That's why I very much welcome this government's review of the status and contributed to it. My contribution focused on the bonkers criteria that stopped Henley from being successful. Despite widespread use of the river for canoeing, paddleboarding, pleasure boating, and of course rowing, and only spontaneous immersed swimmers count as river users. Yet, if you have my balance, or indeed that of the leader of the Liberal Democrats, when paddleboarding, you know that being a paddleboarder doesn't mean you won't end up in the water. Equally, rowers are constantly exposed to spray and contact with the water during their sport, a fact that leads every year to reports of domestic and international athletes falling ill at the Henley Royal Regatta after being exposed to our effluent. It is embarrassing to know that during the regatta, if I flush the toilet, it may well end up on the sides of one of the boats. It is bonkers that organised swimming events have also been excluded from the criteria. Whilst I would understand that we don't want to see the system gamed with events organised solely for the purpose of meeting the criteria, Henley has enjoyed a vibrant organised swimming culture for many years with 4 annual swims organised by the brilliant Henley Swim. So I urge the government to replace the current bathing water designation with a recreational water designation with teeth, taking into account the full range of river users. I also urge... Yes, very happy to.
I thank the honourable member for giving way, and I think he raises a very interesting point, which is that we've talked a lot about the ecological benefits and the health benefits, but given all of the events that he's outlined with Henley, there's also an important economic impact to this. So West Dorset, for example, tourism contributes over 700 million to the local economy every year. We've got the Jurassic Coast and the River Lim Cliff Beach at Lyme Regis has just been designated a designated bathing water. So actually, it's also important that we recognise that clean water is a benefit to our local communities beyond just health, beyond just nature, but also to our tourism industry as well.
My honourable friend is absolutely right to make the point, and every year we welcome thousands of visitors to Henley who contribute to our local economy. Now, I also urge the government to row back, no pun intended, from the idea that cost and deliverability should be a determining factor for investment in a site. Yeah. When Henley welcomes the world to our wonderful section of the Thames each year, it would be simply unacceptable to say, sorry, we must expose you to our sewage because the government thinks it's too hard to treat. I would therefore be really grateful to the Minister for commenting on the intended change to the criteria of bathing water status and meet with me to discuss the situation in Henley.
Excellent. Manuela Patungala.
Thank you, Sir John. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I also would like to thank my honourable friend, the member for Taunton and Wellington, for securing this timely and urgent debate. A healthy natural environment is essential for both public health and our economy. Yet our rivers and bathing waters are being polluted at an alarming rate. In my constituency of Stratford-on-Avon, the River Avon is a treasured natural asset, meandering along its valley, used by many residents for kayaking, swimming, boating, rowing, but sewage discharges and pollution have threatened its water quality. Under the previous government, water companies were allowed to pollute our rivers while consumers pay the price. We need stronger regulations, legally binding water quality targets, and more transparent year-long testing to tackle this crisis. Local authorities must also be given greater powers to hold polluters accountable. I would also like to thank the many citizen science projects in my constituency, like Safe Avon, that have highlighted the scale of this issue and the impact of poor water quality on the Avon and its tributaries rivers and our many precious brooks and streams. I would like to highlight how local residents and groups have come together to create River Hope, a new participatory process taking shape in Stratford-on-Avon district, which fosters a positive narrative for the River Avon ecosystem. It involves individuals, community groups, and others implementing activities and events in, on, around, and about our local water catchments and the biodiversity of their ecosystems. Residents not only engage in practical actions to restore and protect the wildlife and flora the river sustains, but also are creating a positive narrative of gratitude, good stewardship, and love for the water as an essential element of thriving biodiversity. The river, Sir John, has rights. Our rivers and waterways should be safe for swimming, thriving with wildlife, and protected for future generations to cherish and enjoy.
Thank you. I'm calling the front benches early, which is not an invitation to speak.
Cameron Thomas, I think.
Oh, sorry. Have we got Cameron Thomas? Are you bobbing? I didn't think you were bobbing.
Yeah, I wasn't bobbing, sir. I was just going to intervene. I've not yet.
Oh, excellent. Well, then I am going to call the front benches early, which is not an invitation to speak an inordinate length. But we're delighted to hear from Tim Farron.
Sir John, I will not take that personally, although I'm sure it's intended. But it's a pleasure to serve under your guidance this afternoon and to speak in a long line of Liberal Democrats, as you might expect when water is mentioned, but particularly to pay tribute to my honourable friend for Taunton and Wellington for introducing this debate and the eloquence he spoke on behalf of his own communities. I know how active he is, not just as a bather himself, but as a campaigner for clean water swimming in his constituency, and recognising and amplifying the importance of bathing water status. For the people who use the rivers in his communities and in all of our communities, but also recognising that it is an important way of upping the ante and improving the standards that all those responsible for the quality of our waterways are held to. So I very much welcome the points that my honourable friend made, challenging de-designation and how that will not help people or keep people safe. We will simply be in a situation where people who will carry on swimming in those places and will no longer have the protections they had beforehand. He talked very rightly, an issue I am deeply concerned about, which is the potential for flexibility over fixed season dates. The minimum must be the May to September window. But for many people who are enthusiastic about open water swimming, I mean, I have swum in February in Windermere, but I've been with people who've swum in Grasmere and Rydal in January and December and marvel at their hardiness. And they tell me it's good for their mental health, and I believe them. But the reality is that obviously falls without that window, and so it seems a nonsense that we should be not having year-round testing. I also just want to pick up on a point that my honourable friend, the member for Taunton and Wellington, made about what it is that we are testing. The government's new water bill, Water Act, I should say, much good there is in it. Nevertheless, the insistence of only testing for duration of spills in our waterways, in our lakes, in our rivers, streams and coastal areas, doesn't give us the full picture. You can very easily have, you know, a brief deluge or a lengthy trickle, and the reality is that not testing for volume and content gives us not a full picture of what is happening in our lakes and our rivers and our coastal areas. My honourable friend, the member for South Cambridgeshire, talked about the public health and ecological aspects of maintaining important bathing water designations, and how important it is to extend those designations in her constituency. My honourable friend, the member for Henley and Tame, also talked about bathing water status in his communities and his active campaign to extend access within his constituency. And he talked also about the topsy-turvy nature of the bathing water status, which can indeed create all sorts of perverse outcomes. My honourable friend, the member for West Dorset, who is now no longer in his place, has made a really important point about the economic value. Clearly the case in my communities in the lakes and the dales. People don't visit the Lake District not to see the lakes, and the value to our communities is about, you know, something like 4 billion every year in terms of tourism revenue. I'm afraid any threat to the potential cleanliness of our bathing water sites or the rest of our waterways can potentially be catastrophic to our economy. And my honourable friend, the member for Stratford-on-Avon, also made incredibly important points about biodiversity of our waterways and how it's important to protect them and to stand by the wonderful citizen scientists who underpin the work in trying to maintain them and their cleanliness, but also recognising that, as in all aspects of nature, our job is to preserve our waterways for those who come after us. Caring for our neighbour means caring for those, the environment, for those who we'll never meet. And that is vastly important. In terms of, obviously, my communities in the lakes and the dales, I've got 7 designated bathing water areas on Windermere and in Coniston. Very recently, one of the sites on Coniston was designated as poor, which is deeply concerning, but it's been pleasing to see that the local parish council with the National Park, the councillor Suzanne Pender, Business Forum and others have worked very, very well and successfully. So United Utilities have indeed agreed a significant package of investment to help to deal with that problem. The Liberal Democrats take the view that that the current bathing water regulations have not been sufficient to protect our waterways from sometimes some egregious offences. And just some quick figures for you, Sir John. In the northwest alone, in 2023, United Utilities spilled 10,467 times for 76,259 hours into bathing waters. Bathing waters alone. That doesn't count all the other times that they've spilled in other parts of our region. And indeed, United Utilities is the worst offender of all the water companies, despite the fact, obviously, across the country there are other serious offenders as well. The Liberal Democrats take the view that water is really precious, obviously. It is important to our economy, to our ecology, to our heritage, to leisure and to human health, as well as to biodiversity. And is of such significance. We've made it one of the key issues we continue to campaign on, as has been referenced by my honourable friend for Henley and Tame. My right honourable friend, the leader of my party, is so dedicated to our waterways. He spent much of the election in them. But we think that whilst it is commendable, much of what the government's done in the first part of this Parliament with the Water Act has been commendable, and we wait now for the Cunliffe review to see whether there's going to be the advances that have been promised or hinted at. We take the view that there are 3 things we need to make sure we do much better. Thing 1, monitoring needs to be much more comprehensive. Sir John, we welcome the fact the government is engaging citizen scientists in this process. People like the Clean River Kent campaign and Save Windermere in my own constituency and the Rivers Trust up and down the country. But we aren't helping them if we're not doing what we asked to happen, which is that they should be given a place on water company boards, nor are we helping them if the very useful, to a degree, monitoring site that will be available for all these people to look at doesn't have historic data. We're depending upon our brave campaigners, our water campaigners around the country, committing their time to never ever go to bed or go to work or look after their children, because they can't look backwards. If they blink, they may well miss egregious offences in our bathing waters and in other parts of our waterways. So monitoring is important. Secondly, regulation is all important. I'm always careful, I try to be careful, not to in any way castigate the individuals working for Ofwat or the Environment Agency or the water companies for that matter, but to recognise this is a broken system, and we have a diluted regulatory framework in this country. And that's why the Liberal Democrats think that Ofwat, the Environment Agency and other water regulators should be merged into a much stronger regulator that the water companies would actually fear rather than running rings around them all the time. And then finally we think ownership. So I should say that what organisation would we call? We would call it the Clean Water Authority. It would replace and advance on Ofwat and create real powers, real teeth that the current regulatory system doesn't have. And finally, ownership matters. It is an outrage that between 11% and 40% of the water bills of every person in this country are going to pay off the debt of the water companies. That's a disgrace, and it is time that we move those water companies into a not-for-profit status. We don't call for nationalisation. We do call for public benefit companies to be incorporated instead, to make sure that those who look after our waterways do so, and do so with the interests of our water quality, of meeting the needs of the consumer and not racking up huge profits. And a final word on bathing water status. Because bathing water status does give communities more power over the cleanliness and the standards of the waterways that they care about so much, particularly in my part of the world in the lakes, it's clear that very often DEFRA doesn't grant a clean water status when they really should. And so I want to ask on behalf of my own communities, those communities up the River Kent from north of the town of Kendal through Burneside and Staveley, that is a river which desperately needs to be given bathing water status in several places, and would allow those communities who campaign so vigorously for the cleanliness of that river to be able to hold United Utilities and other polluters fully to account. Thank you.
My remarks about brevity were neither targeted at nor limited to Mr Farron, and on that basis I call the Shadow Minister, Robbie Moore.
Thank you very much, Sir John, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And can I start by not only thanking and congratulating the member for Taunton and Wellington on securing this really important debate, but actually thank all members who have contributed, who have made some incredibly valued points, which I will pick up on in my summing up in this debate. And I am also pleased to hear that his constituents are pleased that the French weir on the River Tone has been awarded its bathing water designation, because indeed I was the minister that signed that off when I was in the department. So I'm pleased that they have welcomed that. And I would also like to take the point in just thanking the work that his predecessor did, Rebecca Pow, in campaigning vociferously to get that bathing water designation in place. In 2010, 76% of bathing sites were considered good or excellent, and by 2024 that figure had reached 90%, something that I'm sure all of us would have welcomed, and that's despite the criteria changing and becoming much stricter in 2015. And I was proud, as I've indicated, to announce when I was Water Minister for a brief period of time in DEFRA to sign off an additional 27 bathing water designations last year, bringing more areas under the spotlight to additional monitoring and ensuring more water companies were then able to be held to account for the pollution that they were undertaking, bringing the total number of bathing water designations up to 451 sites for the 2024 bathing season. And indeed, I was proud to see that the River Nid in Harrogate was one of those rivers that was awarded bathing water, and indeed an additional bathing water designation on the River Wharfe, because, Sir John, in my constituency of Keighley and Ilkley, the River Wharfe was the first river to have a bathing water designation on a river, which I was pleased to be involved with that campaign. But I must congratulate a very active campaign in my own constituency, a campaign group in my own constituency, which is the Ilkley Clean River Group, founded by Karen Shackleton, who is an incredible campaigner, along with many others who tirelessly have campaigned for improving water quality, not only in the River Wharfe, but indeed across the country. And I'm sure that many members have received emails from that campaign group. I was also proud to announce, when we announced those 27 different bathing water sites to be added to the list, was the review for bathing water designations. Because from my experience of having the River Wharfe designated, I felt that the bathing water designation regulations at the time were not fit for purpose. And as part of that announcement back in the early months of last year, I'm pleased that the government carried on that with having the review that has taken place, and I've seen many contributions to it, not least from the Office for Environmental Protection, who mainly were in support of many of the changes that needed to take place, feeding their feedback in November of 2024. And I want to go through some of those points, specifically dates, for example. I don't feel that it is just to have bathing water designation sites ring-fenced between May and September, because actually, as all contributions have been made, many of us that are lucky enough to use a bathing water site are not just using them between those specific dates, but actually throughout the year, as has been mentioned by all members. So therefore, why should we be constrained by having the bathing water designation sites between May and September? It seems right and just that those sites should have all-year monitoring to be able to hold those who pollute our rivers to account, but also to make sure that the level of resource, whether it be financially or from a community, is able to improve the water quality within those areas. That brings me on to also the name. I actually would like to challenge the government whether or not simply having the regulations being called bathing water regulations is fit for purpose, because from my own experience within my constituency is once a bathing water designation is approved, there is an assumption that it is safe to bathe in that designation. And when you're having bathing water sites allocated to rivers or indeed on our coastal environments, it can be unsafe actually to swim in those environments given the undercurrents, particularly in river networks that exist. But actually the water quality doesn't mean to be good or excellent. In fact, many of those sites are unfortunately designated as poor. And I would urge the government to think, should it be changed to something like clean water status or something along those lines, not to give those bathers the wrong impression that it is necessarily safe to bathe. And I would also like to pick up on the point to do with automatic de-designation, because this is something that I have absolutely experienced in my own constituency when we were lucky enough to have the River Wharfe designated, but unfortunately, but as probably expected, it has consistently, as a river, being designated as poor consistently year on year on. Fortunately, Yorkshire Water has responded very positively to that in terms of realising an additional level of investment that needs to go in there. We've seen an allocation over a period of time of £15 million being spent on improving water capacity and retention to help with the sewage treatment works in Ilkley, and we have now seen an additional allocation of about £45 million being spent in Ilkley to deal with the wider sewage treatment works. But there is a real risk if you know that the designation is consistently going to be poor, and then after year 5 it then drops off and then has no bathing water designation at all. I fear that by the removal of that de-designation, it then reduces the onus on the polluter to do something about it. And the polluter, of course, may not just be a water company, but it may be agri runoff through phosphorus or nitrate as well. And the point being here is I would very much urge the government, indeed I know the civil servants that are sitting behind will have listened to many of these conversations that we're having, and on that point I'd like to congratulate the work that the civil service have done on this in terms of the regulations in bringing forward this review. But I do feel that when you are relying on evidence coming forward to provide enough resource or finance that is going to improve, sometimes you need to rely on longer data sets than just 1 or 2 years to see those improvement measures. And that relates not only to water companies, but indeed agri-environmental benefit from many of the stewardship schemes that farmers may be entering into as well. So I would urge the government to remove the automatic de-designation. Then it comes on to users, because at the moment under the regulations it specifically relates to those that wish to bathe. But as has also been indicated by those that have contributed today, is we're all using our river networks, our coastal environments, or indeed our lakes for many purposes other than swimming. I don't want to comment on the Lib Dem leader, but not only I will go paddleboarding, but end up in the river and underwater. But the point being here is that under the current regulations, if you're wanting to kayak or canoe or paddleboard, that is not sufficient enough to get a bathing water designation. So I would again urge the government to look at the user of these sites so that we can ensure that more rivers, coasts, lakes actually achieve more bathing water sites. And then I want to raise a point to do with multiple measuring points, because again, from my own experience on the River Wharfe in Ilkley, a bathing water designation relates to a specific point where that monitoring takes place. And on in my constituency, that specific point is actually upstream of the outfall from the water treatment works that Yorkshire Water are quite rightly putting a huge amount of investment into. But it is pointless if it is upstream, where that may be the point where most bathers bathe, but it is less likely to put even more pressure on ensuring that those pollutants are held to account. So what I again would urge the government to look at is having multiple measuring points associated with a bathing water designation. And indeed I would say that as we see more rivers getting allocated bathing water sites, and I was proud to sign more rivers off when I was lucky enough to be the water minister, but I do wish the government to explore having, particularly in river environments, multiple points, because as the river flows through, bathers are more likely to bathe, indeed in coastal environments, over a wider stretch rather than at a single point. And then I would like to raise the point on prior testing, and I'm grateful to Surfers Against Surge for specifically raising this issue of prior testing with me in advance of today's debate, indeed as they have done before, because proposals under consideration include that of sites to be designated going forward could be tested before the designation is granted. And should these prior testings come back as poor, my worry, and indeed actually the point that has been raised by the member for South Cambridgeshire, was that if it comes back as poor, it could provide an ability for a minister not to grant or be less inclined to grant sign-off for that bathing water designation. And I wouldn't want prior testing to result in a bathing water designation not being given approval. Because actually, as I've demonstrated in my own constituency and indeed others, that actually by having the bathing water site itself puts that pressure on the polluter, whoever or whichever organisation that be. And then I'd like to touch on the point to do with forecasting, because this has been also picked up by other members in this debate, but forecasting is important because it provides much more onus on future programming to do with finance that may be going into cleaning up the rivers, and enables more comfort for the community to understand what is happening to improve the water quality at those bathing water sites. But as we all know, even when a site is designated as excellent water quality, they could have a period of time where there has been a huge amount of rainfall that is happening, or a huge amount of potentially a serious pollution incident. But because the monitoring is taken over a wider period of time, and the designation is therefore taken over a wider period of time, if you have a single issue to do with pollution or a heavy downfall of rain, that won't necessarily impact the designation itself. And therefore, I think it would be helpful if more awareness was put out, not only to do with where there were additional rainfall events or additional water entering to the system, but forecasting could better prepare those that do want to bathe or use that water to make the right decision at the appropriate time. So, Mr. Chairman, I would like to sum up by thanking the Ilkley Clean River Group that is in my constituency, because they certainly helped me get a much better understanding when not only I was first elected to the House in 2019, but in my role that ended up being in DEFRA as a water minister. And I would like to thank all members that have contributed in this debate, because, Sir John, water quality is a major challenge. The infrastructure responsible for much of this issue is quite literally Victorian. It cannot be fixed overnight, but it can be fixed with a dedicated and serious plan moving forward. The last administration delivered the start of that plan with the Plan for Water, and in opposition, we will very much welcome working with with the government and indeed other parties from across this House to improve water quality. And I hope that the Minister will be able to reiterate my thanks to her team, who I know have worked incredibly hard behind the scenes on this. And I'd like to say to the Minister that we would be more than happy to provide support in the right places to make sure that all of us are focused on improving water quality. Thank you.
Very well, thank you. Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for Water and Flooding, Emma Hardy.
Thank you very much, Sir John, and it is always a genuine pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I feel we're having a little bit of a love-in this afternoon, aren't we, which is always a nice way to start. And of course, I'd be more than happy to pass on the thanks from the opposition spokesman to the team that have worked on this. And I thank the Honourable Member for Taunton and Wellington for securing this really important debate. And there's indeed so much agreement in the room, I kind of almost wonder if we're still in the House of Commons, Sir John. But certainly to try and cover most of the points that have been made. To just set this into the context, we completely accept and we believe that the system at the moment in terms of water is broken. It's why when we first came in, we changed the Articles of Association to put customers into and their opinions into the water boards. It's why we're doubling the compensation for people who face water outages. It's why we've ring-fenced money so that it can't be diverted for infrastructure improvements, so it can't be diverted into bonuses. It's indeed why we had the Water Special Measures Act, which just came into power and got royal assent last week, because we know that the system as a whole is broken. And it's why also, just last Thursday, I was in Manchester with Sir John Conliffe launching the call for evidence on water, and I strongly urge every member here to actually respond to that call of evidence. There is a huge 200-page consultation document that goes with it, but just because we're kind, there's a 20-page executive summary as well. So please have a look at that, respond to the consultation and make some of these points in there. Now, bathing waters in and itself are not in the Water Commission, and the reason for that, Sir John, was because I wanted to do something on bathing waters really quickly, and I didn't want it to get sort of delayed by the Water Commission when we already knew some of the things that we wanted to look at. So just really quickly to go over some of the things that we're looking at changing. At the moment, the regulations are one size fits all, and I think I'd like to reassure people talking about those dates around bathing waters. So far, I mean, obviously we are going to officially respond to the consultation and there will be an official government response. But so far, I'm yet to see any evidence put forward in response that seems to indicate that they would want to shorten the bathing water window. In fact, most people are advocating to either keep it the same or extend it, recognising that some people go swimming all year round. It's a perfect point at which to mention my mum, Sir John, who has decided open water swimming and swims all year round, and now has her own wetsuit and her own special. I think it's amazing that she's discovered open water swimming in her retirement. Amazing, slightly crazy, but definitely amazing. So obviously we'll have a formal response to the consultation, but so far I've not seen anybody advocating shortening the bathing season. So I just wanted to make a point of mentioning that. And on the de-designation points, I wholeheartedly accept the points made by the official spokesman and by the Liberal Democrats that if you were to look at de-designating, it would be sort of an incentive for companies not to want to invest in improving the water if they knew that after a certain number of years it'd be de-designating. But of course I have to add the proviso, we haven't officially responded to the consultation. However, that would be, you know, from looking at what we've had so far, that's certainly where I'm feeling. And I also want to address this point that, which I'm sure wasn't intended, but I wonder whether it was coming through that it's almost, and it needs, like bathing water status is the golden ticket to which improve the water in that area. And I don't accept that, because if we're saying that bathing water status is the golden ticket to improve the water, that means that we're also almost accepting on the flip side of that, if you don't have bathing water status, then we're okay with your water being completely polluted. We're not okay with that. We want to clean up all our rivers, lakes and seas, and we've got a plan to do it. We've got a £104 billion investment going into the next 5 years. We're looking at what's happening in bathing waters. We're looking at iconic sites around the country. So I think this argument that, you know, we need to have bathing water status, otherwise our waters will remain polluted, is one I'd like to challenge head on. I think that's almost accepting that we're okay, I will in a second, we're okay for things to remain to be polluted. So no. I think we should be focusing much bigger than that. I think we should be focusing on how are we cleaning up all of our rivers, lakes and seas, and then especially looking at bathing waters, because there is a major public health aspect here, and I think this is a really important point and why I'm so delighted Sir Chris Whitty is one of the expert advisors in the Sir Cunliffe review on this, is this argument being made about why are we sort of setting a standard as to say if they're really poor we don't want to allocate them as bathing sites. I kind of think maybe we should just pause and think about that for a moment, because as has been illustrated by the official spokesman, if we're saying something is a bathing site and we're giving it bathing water status, by the fact of calling it a bathing water status, you're implying it is safe to bathe there. If we're designating a site that we know is not safe, we know is not going to be safe for many years to come and would take a huge amount of investment to become safe, is it the right thing to do to be calling that a bathing water site and implying that people are safe to bathe there when we know there won't be for years to come? So I think it's entirely sensible and the right decision to actually say, well, let's improve all our water everywhere, the reforms that we're doing, and that's why we're doing the Water Review, it's why we're doing the Water Special Measures Act. Let's look at the areas where they're most likely to improve more quickly and say to people, well, look, you can bathe here, because this is going to improve more quickly and we can see rapid progress. But actually, these sites that you want to bathe in, if we think about this seriously, they're not going to be improving for a long time. So we actually, as a government, think it could be quite irresponsible to call this a bathing water site and say go there and bathe there when we know full well that there could be a serious damage to people's public health. And you wanted to intervene. So.
Thank you. And I do agree that that's... Thank you very much, and thank you for giving way. I just wanted to perhaps clarify. I think there's two bodies of argument here. One is that given there's been a complete lack, really, of regulations and ways to enforce the polluter pays principle with water companies until now, this has been seen as one of the only mechanisms to do it. However, there is still an argument. I would like the Minister to recognise the argument that given that these are already bathing sites, because the criteria, you have to show that they are already being used as bathing sites, that they are recognised, that they're culturally, that they're ecologically important, and that therefore, given that, even though they are poor, we should be investing in them to make sure they continue and build up that big. We know that if they are declared poor, people are warned of that, and therefore they are not swimming. So we are not subjecting people to unsafe. We are saying we are recognising these are key bathing areas and that the historical, cultural, ecological importance of them now and in the future, and we will build towards that.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree in the sites. And just to be completely clear on the point I was making, so sites that are already designated as bathing sites, of course, need enhanced investment and support to improve them, even if they're poor at the moment. I want to make that really clear. The point I was addressing is when we're looking at designating new sites, and why is it sort of answering the question of why are we looking at core reform number 2, and I'm again stressing we haven't formally responded to this, but why are we looking at core reform number 2? My argument is that if you're looking at a site which you wish to designate in the future, and that's of a really low quality, is it, and this is, like everything, a question for debate, irresponsible to say that we should designate that knowing that it won't reach the standard it needs for the next 5 or 10 years. But for sites that are designated at the moment, 100% agree with you. Even if they're poor, we should be putting extra investment and support into that. And I think this goes back to, and I don't want to rehearse the many discussions, many, Sir John, 36 amendments, I think, at report stage, 44 amendments, many debates and discussions we had with the Water Special Measures Bill during its passage. But just to go back to the question about volume, which is rehearsing an argument we've had many times before, the reason why we're not focusing on the volume of water coming out is quite simply that volume, and we've said this before, can be very diluted and therefore not a great threat. And you could have a small amount of incredibly toxic waste going into something that causes a huge amount of damage. My argument is I would like to see the investment, if you're looking at water quality, go into water quality monitors. And that's what's part of the next price review, is how can we put water quality monitors in, which measures whether it's a huge amount and it's diluted or a small amount it's toxic. We just want to know what damage is it doing to the river, and therefore my focus is and remains on water quality. And I think it was a genuinely really helpful suggestions from the official spokesman about, where do we place those and where do we put them in terms of measuring water quality. I thought that was a really helpful contribution. And also a point, while I'm paying credits, John, the name that we call it and whether we say it's safe to bathe or not, that's again a really, really sort of helpful, really... I will, yes. While I'm praising you. Let's turn back to normal. Come on.
Thank the Minister for giving way, and just recognise, as I do, that not only is the government move quickly on this, but also it's really important that we maintain an engaged and concerned public interest in this. I mean, I've met with the Wild and Clean River Group and with other concern groups throughout the constituency, sort of the length of the time, if you like. And one thing that continues to come back to me is these groups understand that it is a consistent piece of work, that we're constantly iterating on making sure that our rivers don't just get clean, but remain clean into the future. And this is something where government and the public need to consistently work in partnership.
I wholeheartedly agree with my honourable friend, and I know this is an issue that he cares deeply about, and has in fact lobbied me many times about the importance of cleaning up rivers, lakes and seas. And I like to think it is something that we are united on. Many stakeholders, many people, many members have called for bathing water regulation to be updated to reflect the new ways in which we're using our waters or falling into our waters, whatever it might be, and that we continue to support public health outcomes. And as I say, it would be irresponsible for us not to be considering public health when we're thinking about designation. Now, we are a government that listens, we're a government that believes in co-production, we're a government that actively engages. I do again encourage all of you to contribute towards the water review. It's out there now. The consultation's only open for the next 7 weeks, so please don't lose the opportunity to have your say. And I'd like to put on record my thanks to all those environmental campaigners and Surfers Against Sewage and all of those organisations involved in supporting our clean rivers, lakes and seas. I will, yes.
Thank you, Sir John. On the point she makes around the length of time it may take to get some popular sites up to standard, would she then perhaps consider a sort of pre-designation status so that those sites are not left on the shelf with no support whatsoever, so that we're recognising, as my honourable friend said, the importance of certain sites for sporting culture and historical reasons?
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting consideration to make. I hope he did feed it into the consultation when we come to respond it, but I won't commit either way, but it's an interesting point to make and one I will reflect on. Because as I say, this is a government that does listen, Sir John, and on the note of listening, I think it's time for me to finish talking. So thanks to everyone who's contributed to this debate.
Thank you, Minister, and well done for getting your mum in Hansard, by the way. Gillian, would you like to say a few words to sum up and leave me enough time to move?
I will do, Sir John, and really grateful to everyone who has taken part in this debate. Thank them very much. I'm delighted that when I was filling in the form for bathing water status in French Weir, it was such a successful initiative. It attracted not only the support of the opposition spokesperson, but also my predecessor as a Member of Parliament at the time. So we were delighted to get that designation. But that designation would not have happened if Core Reform 2 was in place. Even though that bathing site has been there for hundreds of years, at least to the 18th century. We have records, we have pictures from the 19th century of of changing rooms and beside the river. That would not have happened, and people would continue using the river, and they wouldn't have the benefit of bathing water status. So I really urge the Minister to think very carefully about introducing this very different criteria, moving it away from places where people actually swim and towards places where the industry think they can afford to make it better. That's the wrong criteria. The right criteria is where people are already using the river. And as I say, I was in the river every Saturday in February rather. I didn't quite make January, and people will be there throughout the whole year, whether or not the signs are up and the bathing water status is there. So I would really urge the Minister to think a little more about that one. Finally, I would just reiterate my thanks to everyone for taking part, and I would hope that the Minister would ensure there'll be a debate on the regulations when they go through this House, because they are really important to our river water quality. Thank you, Sir John.
The question is that this House has considered bathing water regulations. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting now stands adjourned.